You are now unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the second lunchtime webinar of the fall 2018 semester, hosted by the Wayne State University School of Information Sciences. I'm Christine A.R. Illichman, Communications Coordinator for the school. And today we are fortunate to have Dr. Cheryl Ball with us. Dr. Ball is the Director of the Digital Publishing Collaborative at Wayne State University Libraries, and she is the Project Director for Vega, an academic publishing platform funded by an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation grant. Additionally, Dr. Ball is the editor of Kairos, a journal of rhetoric, technology, and pedagogy. Dr. Ball will speak for about 45 minutes or so, and then she'll answer all of your questions at the end of her talk. So go ahead and chime in the chat area during the course of her presentation, and then at the end, I'll go ahead and present her questions. Present your questions to her. I'll also be sharing a recording of the presentation in the next few days. So if you miss anything or you know someone who wanted to attend today but they couldn't make it, I will be sending a link to the video for you so that you can watch that again and then share it with others. Dr. Ball, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are now muted.
I guess everybody can hear me all right, and if you can't, then you will flag me in the chat area. I'm really excited to give this presentation today. When Christina invited me to present on the state of digital publishing, I was like, well, that's a pretty tall order. So I'm going to cover some things, and don't let my 52 slides put you off. They will go by very quickly, I promise. For those of you who are coming from Wayne State, you will see some of these slides. They will look familiar from a presentation I gave earlier in the year, and wrapping some other things together. So I'm really looking forward to your questions. I'm going to try not to talk for the whole 45 minutes because I'm curious to have a back and forth about some of this work that I'll touch on. Okay, so let me start by saying this is my librarian disclaimer, that I spent the last 14 years as a faculty member in various English departments across the U.S., teaching in professional writing and editing programs and publishing studies programs. So my background is actually in academic writing, in rhetoric and composition specifically. That's what my PhD is in. And so I've come to the world of digital publishing and specifically library publishing through researching how writing happens and writing for publication happens in digital environments. And that aligned me very closely with what librarians were doing in terms of digital publishing. So I'm happy to be here talking with you today about all of this. Let's see, the arrow keys don't work. So use the button. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the state of digital publishing, and specifically I'm going to begin with what's called threshold concepts, and this is a term that I take up from my work in writing studies, where we all come to sort of a shared understanding of the state of the field, and I'm applying that to digital publishing, specifically as it's happening within libraries and university presses that are embedded within libraries. So I'm going to start, though, with the ACRL framework for information literacy, because it gives us some threshold concepts to talk about information literacy as related to digitality and digital publishing that you are all probably already familiar with. Authority is constructed, information is a process, creation is a process, scholarship is a conversation. These particular bullets from that framework mirror exactly the way that rhetoric and composition scholars think about writing and writing in digital environments and the process of that. So I just want to say that there is there's a shared affinity here across these two disciplines that I've found myself working in that informs a lot of my thinking about digital publishing in the libraries. Okay, so to take the threshold concepts metaphor a little bit further, we all, I think, can agree, if you work in scholarly communications, that the so-called crisis about ScholComm is not new. What do I mean by the crisis? It's the unsustainability of publishing materials through the big five, which I'll talk about in a second. The systems that we use to support our publishing efforts are meant to manage print materials, but in a digital environment, we don't really have the right mechanisms yet to upend the print hold on scholarly communications. So that's part of the crisis. We can also agree in ScholarComm that we're looking at the entire research life cycle, everything from the author building their data set, doing their initial methods, working on the research question around their project and all of the bits and pieces that get collected as part of that process, through any conference presentations they might do, revisions that they might do on articles or on books, and then finally to produce a project at the end, whether it's a book or an article or a data set, or if the data set indeed is the final project, or a digital humanities project, or some other kind of digitally mediated project, or some combination thereof that we haven't even begun to think of, as well as the review process that surrounds that, including post-publication review. So the research life cycle here is capacious. That's kind of the point, that we can cover all of it. And then, as librarians and also as archivists, we have to decide what do we get to keep around that part of that life cycle. Further, scholarly communications folks and digital publishing folks, and I am aligning those two areas. Can talk more about that if you want, why I'm doing that, but I tend to morph between the two phrases of scholarly communications and digital publishing when it happens within a library. But folks who work in that realm understand that authors can be anyone who's contributing to furthering knowledge. We also can all agree that journal prices in particular have far outpaced inflation. And I point to this particular screenshot of a research project. It's a bit cut off there, but it's from the Library Journal in 2006, where they looked at the costs, the overall increase for ISI titles in particular, far outpaces inflation, which is a bit of a problem. And if you know anything about collections budgets, you know that bundles are killing library budgets. I can't remember exactly what Wayne State's is off the top of my head, but it's multiple millions of dollars a year that we spend towards the big five and other publishers, Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, and Sage, who make billions, like literally, actually billions of dollars in profit. That is not a hyperbolizing of their profits, which is just kind of gross and disgusting to me. Okay, maybe the moral attachment that I give is not a threshold concept within ScholarComm people, but it is within a subset, so I'll stick with that. Okay, so further, some more threshold concepts are that within libraries, we can harness the power of repositories and of other types of library publishing to offer open access content that will help us counter the crisis, and that we value the open access models of publishing and making things available so that we can get as much research into the hands of scholars, no matter who they are, as possible. Okay, so then what do I mean by open? What do I mean by access? Open is about the transparency and availability of different items in the research life cycle, and I'll discuss that in a little more detail in a sec. Access is talking about that openness, the availability, readability, and preservation of a publication. So it's really covering a wide spectrum there that the big five is trying to take advantage of, in a way, if I may, by offering open access publishing, but doing so by charging authors an article processing charge. And I apologize if this is all old hat to all of you, but what I've found is that having this level of detail is sometimes helpful to librarians working in this world if they're not specifically working in ScholarComm. So hang on for a second if you know this information already. but I like to lay out a little bit of a foundation before we jump into some other issues. So a lot of people use APCs as part of their open access publishing. I think it's a terrible idea, but we're still working on models. The folks working in digital publishing at the national and international level are still trying to figure out how to get around having to charge authors for their own open access publishing. Okay, so specifically when we're talking about open, we're talking about a bunch of different kinds of openness. Yes, there's access, but there's also open source, data, review, science, and education. So for instance, when we're talking about open access, we're talking about the free and reusable scholarly publications, which might use different business models, right? And I'm not going to go into all the details about what this means right now, but I'm happy to answer questions about that during the Q&A. So much of this is about licensing and using Creative Commons licensing whenever possible to allow anyone to reuse the material however they want. Open source is another form of open where we're talking specifically about source code and making it free to use. So if you're familiar with a lot of the open source platforms that are happening in libraries these days, I'm familiar with the publishing ones, which I'll talk about in a second, then those allow you to sort of participate in the building of the code as well as reuse the code for free. Free as in puppies, though, right? That's always the issue. Is there always comes a price, whether it's time or human resources, even though if you don't have to pay for the software itself. Okay. There's also open data. I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, although it is related to digital publishing, but it's the concept of making one's data sets open and reusable so that you can check on reproducibility and also just expand the knowledge base by asking different research questions about a data set. Open review is an area of openness that's very close to my heart because of my work as an editor. And I'll give you some examples about this later, but it's the idea that when you're peer reviewing a piece of scholarship or publication, you don't have to use only sort of what's considered the quote-unquote traditional methods of peer review, using double anonymous, what some people call double blind. I prefer not to call it that. Double anonymous peer review process where the author and the editor don't know, the author and the reviewers don't know who each other are. Opening up the review process makes it more transparent and allows for collaborative peer review, which can actually be much more rigorous. Open science talks about all these different kinds, but sometimes the term gets confused because people think they're just referring to scientific research, not humanistic or artistic research. So I don't tend to use that phrase a lot, but it's much bigger in Europe than it is over here, actually. And finally, open education resources. So you probably heard of OER and people coming up with free textbooks or open textbooks for students and teachers to use in the classroom that would have no charge for the readership and reuse, which is pretty cool. Another way that we talk about open. So there's a lot of possibilities here, and all of these, each of these play a role in the way we can conceive of the digital publishing landscape as it's happening within libraries in particular these days, because of course the beauty of libraries is they don't necessarily have the same kinds of budget models that other sections of the university have, such as the university press, which is often required to break even if not make a profit, and usually they're urged to make a significant profit. And the commercial publishers have to make a significant profit, but the libraries aren't necessarily put in that same position, so we can try to make things as freely available as possible so that users have the most access as possible without it being detrimental to our own budget models. Okay. Some of this information I pulled from, I've got references at the end, but there's this one pager handout, 10 things you should know about Skullcom, that I would point you to for follow-up on some of this information. And of course, I've just given you a very broad view of how open access can help us think about digital publishing in the libraries, and there's several organizations working on the same issue. So it's like really hard to pull together actually all of the things that are going on with digital publishing in the US, never mind internationally. So I've listed here just a couple of areas if you're not familiar with these folks. I particularly rely on the Library Publishing Coalition's work. They helped create the ethical framework for library publishing, which if you are in a library where you're not yet doing scholarly publishing as part of the open offerings for your university, that framework is an excellent place to start. And one of our colleagues here at Wayne State, Joshua Neds Fox, helped work on that document, and he did an excellent job, as did everybody else on that team. So I highly encourage you to check this one out. Thinking a little bit broader about the digital publishing landscape in libraries, I stole this slide courtesy of Charles Watkinson, the director at University of Michigan Press, who put together nicely the massive ecosystem of digital publishing, and mostly digital monograph, but not necessarily just digital publishing initiatives that the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation has funded in the last couple of years. 58 grants is a lot of grants to figure out, as Mellon has been trying to do, to radically change the digital publishing and the scholarly publishing landscape through digital initiatives. Vega, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, is one of our projects here at Wayne State. Fulcrum is the project at University of Michigan that Charles was talking about when I stole this slide from him. And he was talking specifically about how it would connect with some of the other projects going on that were also Mellon funded. I'm not going to go into what each of these publishing platforms or initiatives do, except to say that they tend to fall into sort of two camps of two themes, if you will. There's a group of them like Fulcrum and Manifold and Scalar, PubPub, Vega, Janeway, Editoria, and some others that are platforms where Mellon has funded libraries or university presses, or a combination of both if the press reports to the library, to build a digital publishing platform for different kinds of outputs. Primarily, Mellon is interested in monographs as an output because they're more interested in making sure that the humanities and the humanistic disciplines are covered, where monographs are more of a more typical than scholarly articles for a lot of disciplines. But some of these platforms, like Vega, which I'll talk about later, do also cover journals as well as other outputs, other genres, if you will. So platforms is sort of one thread. Another thread is funding sort of incubation areas where a university like, which actually none of these would be included as that, I don't think. Maybe it depends on who you talk to. But what I mean by incubation areas is a university like Brown has gotten money to help facilitate the publication through other platforms and through other university presses and systems of their own authors and own faculty members' scholarship through digital means. So they get to work very closely in their digital humanities program in the library to help authors develop these kinds of books that might then get published by Stanford. And it may be in their interactive scholarly work section, or it may be in their regular sort of enhanced ebook platform. But a lot of these folks are working in enhanced ebooks, which is like, if you have a repository and you upload PDFs, or you upload an OER there that's just like a print-like book, but it's just a PDF, a plain PDF, that's sort of on the one end of the spectrum of digital publishing. And then on the extreme other end of digital publishing are like what is referred to by Stanford's interactive scholarly works, which are more like digital humanities projects or interactive websites that authors publish their research in, and they may get published and peer reviewed through a variety of mechanisms. And in the middle there you have ebooks, enhanced ebooks, which are maybe like PDFs plus a video. They might have some video material or audio material embedded within the PDF, or they might use, as the Fulcrum platform is meant to do, publish the ebook online through a reader interface that then also has multimedia assets embedded within it. Excuse me a second, my allergies are driving me crazy today. Okay, so you can see quickly at a glance from this slide that the landscape of digital publishing projects, primarily in the US with this group, but also internationally, Janeway is an international effort, is vast, and it would be impossible for me to cover all of it in 45 minutes, so I'm going to keep moving. Okay. Before I talk specifically about what we're doing here at Wayne State with these efforts, I'm going to give you a little bit more background on some extreme examples of digital publishing. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I come from a background in rhetoric and composition where I've been working within digital publishing and studying that for the last 20 years, including my time as a grad student. And a lot of people come to me these days when they look at this landscape, they're like, oh, these projects are only 3 or 4 years old. Like, no, this is still a nascent effort in terms of digital publishing. And I like to remind folks that it's not new. And I show them the WAC Clearinghouse website, which WAC stands for Writing Across the Curriculum. It's just a jargon acronym that we use in writing studies. But the WAC Clearinghouse started in 1996 as an open access press in writing studies. And it publishes, as you can see, books, journals, and other resources, all of which are peer-reviewed. So that's a long time for something in the humanities to take advantage of a digital publishing arena. So yeah, go 20 years now. The WAC Clearinghouse recently got rebranded into Colorado State University Open Press. So when we hear about university presses being like, oh, we're the first ones to do entirely open, I'm like, okay, sure, if you count the actual name of the university press being the foregrounded thing, but with the WAC Clearinghouse being the birthright, I guess, of CSU Open Press, I'm like, well, no, actually, we've been doing this for a long time, including, as you can see, they branding it as OER for folks who are coming new to the website. And this press right now, they're getting ready to expand, but they do have this one imprint of the rhetoric and composition books and journals that they published with a lot of data on how that affects people's tenure and promotion cases. So I like to show people that example. And then this is an example of the journal that I edit. And Kairos is sort of unusual because it doesn't do print-like or PDF publications. And it doesn't really do enhanced ebook kinds of publications. I mean, it's a journal, first of all, so it publishes article-length pieces. But it's known primarily for publishing what we call web texts, which are pieces of interactive scholarly multimedia. So they're websites that the authors create based on their own argument that they need to construct and demonstrate to a reader, so that the form and the design of the piece, or the design and the content, enact the argument together. And this journal's been around for 24 years now. Yeah, 23. We're finishing up our 23rd year and going into our 24th year, which is pretty exciting. And it's open access. All these examples that I'm showing you are open access that do not use APCs. They just run on a volunteer model. Because the scholars just want to get published, and then we have people in the discipline who want to help get these things published. So we've created a workflow at Kairos that helps us do these kinds of interactive pieces. And I wanted to show you a couple of examples, but unfortunately, the big blue button system sort of freaked out when I tried to upload my PowerPoint with the videos all embedded in it. It's like, oh, this is too large, too big of a file size. So I had to get rid of the videos and just have these static screenshots. But I'll just tell you briefly what would happen if you clicked on the open button. So this screenshot is of the web text, peer-reviewed, that we published in Kairos. And when you click on the open button or you click on these doors, they open up. It's animated. And inside, you can see a set of images that look kind of like this thumbnail up in the right-hand corner that each one you can mouse over, and it will take you into a different section of the web text so that you can read the piece non-linearly or linearly if you just want to like sort of click through them one by one by one. And the sum total of this piece is meant to indicate that like we're dealing with a Wunderkammer here, a curiosity cabinet. And if we talk about arranging images through juxtaposition, then we can facilitate the invention process. And it has a little praxis-oriented section in there where the author tells us how she teaches this in her own classroom. So I'm sorry that I couldn't show it to you, but you'll have to go to the journal and check it out. Here's another piece that we published. This one based on alternate reality games, where if you scroll through this little board graphic here, you can get to different parts of the article, or up here you've got this drop-down menu, and at parts of the drop-down menu you can play a little game where you have to drag a piece from one section to the other, and then it jumps you to a new section within the article. So again, sorry, I can't actually show you how that works. I'm going to skip this one for a second. So Kairos is not the only journal that does this kind of work. There's a lot of journals out there that do it. And by a lot, I mean there's like 24. So it's not a whole lot, but there's enough that have started cropping up over the last couple of years. Southern Spaces is about 10 years old. The JAR is about 6 years old. Enculturation has published on and off for about 20 years. In Transition, it's been publishing for about 7 years, I think. And Parse is fairly new on the scene. I think it's only 2 or 3 years old. And some of these are national and some are international efforts. The Jump is actually not publishing currently because they're going through a technical hiatus, which happens a lot with this kind of stuff. So these are sort of extreme examples of what digital publishing can look like, many of which, not all, come out of the discipline of rhetoric and composition studies. As that field is very interested in information literacy in the same way that librarians are, and how we can teach students how to write with technology and think smartly about, and rhetorically about digital technology. So that gets enacted in the scholarship that we're producing in this field. So there's a long history of this kind of work that's been going on, like I said, since 1996 in this particular discipline, so shortly after the web became a thing. But one of the major problems, and as I mentioned with the Jump, is that there's not really any infrastructure for supporting this kind of work. A lot of it is done sort of jerry-rigged into a Drupal installation, let's say, or a WordPress hack, or it uses like the Journal of Artistic Research has a back end that's called the Research Catalog. It's kind of like a repository, but it's meant to hold artistic works. And even in the 5 years they've been publishing, it's gone through some radical revision a couple of times. And the problem with that is that sometimes it can mean that links break or websites go missing, articles go missing, and it's been a real problem for a couple of these journals. Here's another press that publishes similar interactive websites. So it's instead of article length pieces, Computers and Composition Digital Press publishes book length web texts. got an example that I had to delete. I'm going to skip through this stuff. And a more recent example, the University of Michigan Press also publishes the Digital Rhetoric Collaborative Book Series, which is a book-length web text-based work. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of these journals and presses have problems with sustainability, and a lot of that can be tracked back to these three types of infrastructures that are needed for digital publishing. You have to have the scholarly, the social, and the technical all working together in order to be able to provide a platform that's of sustainability, never mind discoverability, findability, all the other things that's important for library publishing to pay attention to. But fundamentally, even to get something off the ground, you have to have these three things working together. So what do I mean by them? Well, the scholarly infrastructure is simply, does the discipline that wants to publish digital media or media-rich or enhanced ebooks value that kind of work in terms of its promotion and tenure process, or in terms of, you know, what is being valued by that discipline? As I've shown from the examples, rhetoric and composition has been doing this for a long time. The American Historical Society is starting to take up this work more readily. The American Anthropological Society is also starting to take up some of this work. And of course, when you're talking about just sort of print-like digital publishing, the sciences, the hard sciences, have been doing this really well for a really long time, creating preprint servers and the like to sort of capture a large part of their research lifecycle in digital means, and doing open review on it for eventual publication. So the scholarly part is sort of where you have to start, and that's not something that librarians can necessarily interject into, right? Like, that has to come from the scholars themselves wanting and needing certain kinds of publishing to happen. The social infrastructure takes the scholarly to another level, where it can't just be one scholar who wants to do this and you're like, sure, I can help you do that, because there has to be some sort of mechanism for peer review. Is one great example of the social infrastructures that are needed. So, like, how do people work together to get this thing accomplished, right? It's rarely a one-off scholar anyways who's producing a more advanced or enhanced or interactive piece of digital publishing. And even if it's just a sort of quote-unquote plain old, you know, print-like textbook or like an open textbook, there's still peer review mechanisms, both formal and informal, that come into play that are required for the social infrastructure to flourish. And then the technical infrastructures are simply, what are the platforms and what are the sustainability practices embedded and inherent in those platforms that people are choosing to use? If you work with any technical system, you know that you're going to have to migrate probably every 5 to 10 years, and it's a real pain in the butt. So how do you plan within a technical system for that future and eventual migration? How does the technical platform support publishing specifically, and not just function as a repository necessarily, right? Because there's an added layer of need on top of there that includes all the editorial workflow that I'm not going to really talk about today because I don't have time. So these are the sort of the three issues that remain strongly in my head as I'm thinking about how do we adapt this print workflow that, with the exception of the World Wide Web, right, and XML, has really been the same for 500 years, right? But in the digital environment, how do we upend that so that we can do things more seamlessly and more innovatively in the digital environment? Here's another video that I had to cut. So I had the screenshot that is meant to show you a couple of examples of the ways that Open Journal Systems, as one platform, publishing platform, harnesses the ability to publish in open environments. Open journal systems has been around since 2002, I believe it is, so about 25 years. They're very long-standing in the field and very well respected, and they provide a print-like publishing platform, publishing workflow for journals that want to move online. They have some drawbacks, though, that it's a little hard to use. Folks may not actually want to stay within the print publishing workflow, and it's really difficult to make the journal look like anything that isn't sort of this default template. You know, you can change the color, stuff like that, but it's hard to customize what your journal actually looks like, which for some journal editors is a real deal breaker. Okay, take a sip of water. Apparently I lied about taking my whole 45 minutes. Okay, so what are we doing at Wayne State to combat some of the problems and the crises in scholarly communication? Well, one of the first things that we did when I got here was we joined the OA 2020 initiative, which I don't have a slide on, but it's an international initiative that I encourage you to look up, that is universities coming together to support going radically open access and getting rid of big bundles, ideally by 2020, but it's also late 2018 now, so that may not happen on the same timeline as we had originally hoped. But otherwise, we are working on Vega, the publishing platform that I mentioned earlier. This started as a Mellon grant when I was at West Virginia, which was the school I was at before I moved to Wayne State on January 1st of this year. And Vega is very dear to my heart because it's taking all of the editorial workflows that I'd been crafting as the editor of Kairos over the last 18 years and building from scratch a new sort of cutting edge publishing system that would really help us break out of those print-based workflows that I mentioned earlier that restrict us in what we're actually able to publish and to publish openly. So we're almost ready to release that, which I'm excited about. And we've got several partners and funders. Obviously, the Mellon Foundation funded it. And we partnered with the School of Architecture and Design in Oslo and with Sanity Studios, which is a development firm in Norway, who helped us build it. So some of the things that Vega does, it offers the media-rich publications so that you can get more of the enhanced nature and the interactive nature of scholarship published way more easily than sort of the ways that people have been doing that kind of work, which has been customized and handcrafted, kind of like hipster scholarship. Everybody sort of does their own bit. It also allows for more flexible workflows instead of those rigid print-like workflows that we're so used to following. Sometimes digital publications and born digital publications in particular need slightly different and more thoughtful and more unusual workflows. And we talked about peer review and open peer review earlier, and so that was a big part of what we wanted to include in Vega, was to make sure that not only would there be an option for double anonymous peer review, but that people could also do open peer review as an option if they wanted, so that collaboration can happen among the editorial board members and even with the author if the venue wants. And then unlike the problems that people have expressed with OJS, which can make it difficult to customize the interface, Vega is what you call a headless CMS, so you can build the front end to look any way you want, and it will just pull on the back, on the back side for your content. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this, but we worked closely with the developers to come up with a workflow for the EDP, or the editorial design production process, as it would happen, as it could translate from the way that university presses and library publishing can work into the Vega platform. So it has this nice workflow built in, but that is not rigid. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that in the Q&A, but I want to make sure I get to the Q&A. One of my favorite screenshots from the Vega system, and this screenshot is a couple months old, but it still looks pretty much like this, is that at a glance, you can see where all of your publications are in the workflow process. So you might have an initiating stage, and you can call this whatever you want. This is just what we've plugged in for the time being. And you can say, oh, these 2 book reviews here, because each dot represents a distinct article or chapter or book, depending on how you've got the system set up. These 2 need attention because we're running behind on that deadline or something, or they've just been sitting there for too long. And oh, these 3 case studies that are in copy editing, those need to be completed ASAP because that issue needs to be published, etc. And you can click on the dots and it will take you to those particular articles across any of the volumes and issues or chapters or books or data sets that you're publishing. So it's a bit content agnostic in the way that it handles what you can actually publish in it. And then it's got a commenting and a notification system so that you can sort of keep track at an easy glance what's going on in your publication at any time. So pretty excited about Vega. I'm going to skip this slide. It's cool. So Vega, though, is part and parcel of this larger plan that we have in the libraries at Wayne State to create what we're calling the publishing house. And we're imagining it as an actual house. And who knows like when we'll actually get the house, but that's the vision is to have this physical location where people can gather to talk about publishing. And the publishing house isn't brand new in that it's not creating things from scratch necessarily, but what it's doing is pulling in a bunch of ways that the university and the libraries in particular are already working in digital publishing, whether it's through digital collections or whether it's in collaboration with the university press, which is a separate entity. How can we, and whether it's with the digital humanities group that's on campus, how can we partner together to present to the world a way that will allow us to push on and innovate in digital publishing circles in a way that uses Vega as the foundation for that. We'll also be offering hosting services with Vega, so that's going to help fund the house as we go forward through title and through membership offers. And then using Vega, we hope to collaborate with the press, like I said, to do different levels of production, which will have open versions, but may also have print-on-demand versions, right? And then that's a lesson that we've learned from the WAC Clearinghouse Press, that they have all these open versions of books, but people still want to print them and read them. And that, of course they do, because that's what that genre and that medium is best at. If you have a 300-page book, you don't want to read the whole thing on screen, right? Some people do, and that's good, and you should be able to do that. And for accessibility purposes, that's fantastic. But also, let's print it out, let's mark it up, and then we can make some money there and bring it back into the publishing house. We also want to start training people to do this kind of work, thinking particularly about the enhanced books and the interactive scholarship. We've been running a workshop called Kairos Camp, named after the journal, for the last couple of years, where we teach authors. It had been funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, where we got to teach authors and also editors and publishers how to build and also how to edit and sustainably publish digital humanities and digital media-based projects. So building off that idea, offering both short-term like webinar type projects and longer-term institutes is part of our goal. Eventually, pie in the sky, we'll have the house where we can host fellows to come for 6 months or a year, where they can work closely with the librarians here on staff who are already doing these kinds of projects, and alongside the press and what the press has to offer in terms of development and developmental editing. And then teaching interns, particularly students here at Wayne State. We may also have some virtual internships, but also a key goal for us is to get into the community, and that's partly why we want to have this house structure, so that being in Detroit, in particular, we can start introducing the concept of what it means to work in information science and to work in publishing and digital publishing to the local student population around here. I'm really excited about that. Out here in the yard, we've got some other projects. I work with the Council of Editors of Learned Journals. And I'm not going to say much more about that because I want to talk a little bit about MDPX, which is the Michigan Digital Publishing Collaborative. And that's Wayne State, University of Michigan, and Michigan State all working together. Right now we're in talks to collaborate between Fulcrum, which is University of Michigan's ebook platform, and Humanities Commons, which is now housed at Michigan State with their project director, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, as the director of DH there. How can we create a publishing ecosystem that's modeled on the three of these Mellon-funded platforms working together in order to show how the interoperability or the stickiness between all of these different Mellon-funded platforms, like I showed on the screen earlier, might be able to provide a round trip for scholarly production that the libraries can host and maintain and sustain. So we're really excited about the publishing house. Okay, what can you do? What's your takeaway from this? Well, just off the top of my head, these were sort of three things that I thought would be great places for anyone who wanted to get into publishing and library publishing to start. The Educopia Institute has created the library publishing curriculum. That curriculum, if you don't know anything about how publishing works, or you need to know just a little bit more about things like permissions or policies or editorial workflows, that's a great place to start. And it's a free framework. Just Google it and you'll find the curriculum online in a Google Doc, and it's super good, super good. Once you start publishing, or if you already are publishing in any sort of capacity, Google the library publishing directory and you can add your name to that and add your institution's work towards OER and open publishing to the publishing directory. It's got, gosh, I can't remember how many people are in it, but I think it's well over 100 now institutions worldwide who are doing library publishing through the Library Publishing Coalition. And then finally, the Open Textbook Network, which also has the Open Textbook Library, offers a platform where scholars and teachers who want to adopt free and open textbooks can go to find them, right? And then if your university or library joins the network, then you get some hands-on support in how to use the library, and also a workshop in getting people who work at your school or who are affiliated with your library to write reviews on the textbooks that are already published. So this doesn't commit you to publishing, it just gives you a community in which to start looking at open publishing and digital publishing for the success of students and for access for them. Okay, so I've got a list of references. I'll make sure that y'all can download the slide so you can come back to that. I'll stick up this slide for a second and then I will end there. Thank you.
You are now unmuted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ball. We now have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat room and I will ask them on your behalf. While we wait for folks to post their questions, I wanted to mention that when I send the video link, I will also send links to all of the information that Dr. Ball has shared today, so that the documents and the websites that she has mentioned and any others that she recommends that might be of interest to you, I'll make sure they're in the email. Jennifer has asked, for enhanced and interactive scholarship, what challenges have you had with meeting web accessibility guidelines and how have you addressed those?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jennifer. Thank you for asking that. Web accessibility is hugely important, and I'm pretty proud of the way that Kairos has been handling that for the last couple of years. And we've been, the thing about web accessibility guidelines is that they are constantly changing. And so every venue has to adapt to that in some way. And Vega accommodates for a lot of that, not only on the US-based standard, but on a Norwegian standard, which is actually quite higher than the US-based standard. But I'll point you to, and let me see if I can just like Google it real quick in the background and I can paste the link in. A couple of years ago, I brought together a team of publishers and digital rhetoric scholars and librarians who are working in digital publishing and some open access proponents. Here we go. Here it is. I brought them together to sort of have this 4-day discussion around what accessibility means in terms of digital publishing. And we came up with this white paper, if you will, that I've posted in the link below your question there. And it's open. We published it in Kairos as part of the 20th anniversary issue. And I'm very proud to say that a lot of journals who are doing this kind of interactive work and enhanced work have looked to our design guidelines on the journal, which are partly crafted from, or I should say the white paper is crafted in part from these guidelines, which I'll post the link for that too. Sorry for the typing. So we've had, journals like Southern Spaces have adopted a version of our guidelines. Stanford University Press adopted part of them in doing their interactive monograph-linked publications. So I feel confident that we've been able to do a good job on web accessibility, even at a fundamental level of making sure that the information architecture for the kinds of projects that we're publishing is meeting W3C guidelines and the web accessibility guidelines, making sure that every video and audio that we publish has some sort of transcript, whether it's descriptive or voiceover, things like that. So there's a whole very long list. Yeah, you're welcome.
You are now unmuted.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, and I'll make sure that we include those links as well in the email. And if anyone's watching a recording after the fact, and perhaps on YouTube or any other platform that we post this video on, I'll include those links within the description of the video.
Cool.
Okay, well, I don't see anybody else typing, so I will talk slowly just in case anybody still wants to add anything. But before we wrap up, I wanted to mention that we do have 2 more podcasts coming up featuring experts like Dr. Ball. So on November 19th, we have a podcast about libraries that podcast. A webinar about libraries that podcast. And on December 5th, we offer a webinar about fake news, misinformation, and libraries. Okay, well, I don't think we're going to have...
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and all of the resources that you've shared with us. And we certainly look forward to learning about how Vega develops and the work that you're doing through the Digital Publishing Collaborative.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks so much. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
You are now muted.